everyone, and welcome to Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's me, your host. My mission is to bring the power of healing to trauma and abuse survivors. That's why every guest on this show will bring you an amazing story of healing in action. So come on, everyone, let's heal. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. Of course, that's me, your host, and I am delighted to have with me today my friend, George Bryant. Hi, George.
Hello, girl. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How about yourself?
I am stoked to be here.
Ah, wonderful. I'm stoked to have you here. Would you take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Oh, one of my least favorite and also favorite questions at the same time.
However you want to introduce yourself, it's totally open to you.
Yeah, I know. So today I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it the way that feels right to my heart.
All
So I'm
right.
an unapologetic lover of Jesus. I'm an A- dad today, about a B+ partner, and I'd give myself like a C+ as an entrepreneur with room for improvement all the time. But I say that authentically because in doing this for 20 years, it drives me bonkers where people get stuck in the perfection of how they show up and how people perceive them and the forever elevator pitch bios that are not our value intrinsically, but all too often we identify with the labels. And so I'm really happy. I'm grateful. I'm excited to be here. I love your mission. I love your story. I love that we got connected through our dear friend April, who I love to pieces. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here and I feel really good about it. So that's how I'm going to intro myself today.
I love that. Very authentic. I love the grading system too. I was like, oh, if I were going to do that, how would I rate myself today? So I have to say, I'm feeling pretty good overall today. I made a major advancement in my healing journey yesterday, and what I'm calling a healing milestone. So I closed on a home to become a homeowner again yesterday, which is something I didn't think I was going to do probably ever again at one point in time. So I'm feeling pretty good about all things today. But I
Very,
don't think about that. I like that grading system.
very ironic as similar story to you is navigating a divorce right now. And last night I was looking at homes
Mhm.
and I'm like, this might be more of a reality than I thought it would be. And all of a sudden, visions started unlocking and stability and peace and all these other things. And so it's just interesting timing. So congratulations on that. I love
Thank
that for
you.
you.
Thank you. It is interesting timing for me, and I'll say it's definitely God moving in my life because it was a rapid change from me going to a place where I didn't think I was ever going to be a homeowner again. In fact, I was telling people like April at the end of last year, I was like, maybe I'm just going to stick all my stuff into storage and just go be a digital nomad from Airbnb to Airbnb around the country. And now I closed on a house yesterday. So I've gone very quickly, like literally in about 4 months, radically the opposite direction to where I have certainty in what I'm going to be doing for a while to come.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's amazing.
definitely in the air, and that movement's there. So
I'm excited for you. That's amazing. I
it
love
is.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is definitely a completion, a milestone on my healing journey. So I'm very happy to be in this place. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. All right. We're going to come around to the work that you do, which is to help heart-centered people like me, like April, like yourself, to be visible out in the world and to share our message. And no doubt, I know that you and I will work together at some point in time in the future. That's coming. And we will talk about that a little bit more. But let's go backward in time a little bit. And of course, we're going to spend some time talking about your healing journey because I'm always interested in that. So, what sets people on the pathway to say, I have something to heal from and I'm going to do the work to heal it? And then what that looked like for you. And so we'll come around to that. But before we get there, there's always the need to heal. And there are things that happen to us that put us in a place where we need to take the journey. So, this is where I open it up to you to say whatever you feel led to say and to share with anyone who's listening to this or watching us talk about what it is that has happened to you in your life that got you to that place where you needed to heal.
I love it. I am so excited to be. I am so supportive of your mission.
Oh, thank you.
And I am 100% in your corner for this because this is profound. So I want to call out a couple elephants in the room as I do this and share this too, because it's really interesting. So first thing I want to share is I love the word healing. And I also think people have an unhealthy relationship with it.
I would agree with that. Yes, I
Because
do.
the thing that I learned personally, which you will all start to understand in a minute, is that I thought healing was a finish line. And truthfully, healing is an active pursuit of growth.
That's right.
And that's how I see it. And I also think that for a majority of my life, I looked at healing as it was something I had to do, and it was bad, and it was wrong, and it was hard, when in actuality, it is the greatest gift that you can give yourself and give the rest of the world. And so before I get into my story, I wanted to share that because I also run into people all the time who like to trauma bond. And they're like, I could never relate to what you went through. I'm like, you're not supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trauma is relative because my story is my story and it was God's dose of my growth. And I've heard other people's stories and I'm like, I could never make it through that. And on paper, it felt 1,000 times easier than some of the things that I experienced. But as I share this, and I've actually, for somebody who's done 10,000 podcasts, I've never said this before. But before I share my story, I don't want anybody to use it as a permission slip to be right about yours. I want you to use it as a permission slip to go rewrite yours, because it doesn't matter whether it's small or it's large. It could be as simple as a teacher saying something that you didn't like, to losing a best friend, to experiencing loss. But anything that created an emotional activation in you is an invitation. And from my view, it's God putting a lamp at your feet and saying, this is the direction I want you to walk. Because on the other side of this is a person who gets to spread their message or their movement or their belief or impact and positively impact somebody else. And so I felt like a disclaimer today.
I love that. And I 100% agree with everything that you've just said. In fact, I say the real measure of trauma and abuse is what it does to your heart. If it binds your heart up and you're carrying fear-based emotions, that's where you live from. That's the measure for you. It has nothing to do with the events itself.
A
Completely
thousand
agree with
percent,
you.
a
Yeah.
thousand percent. And it's easy for me on this side in truthfully, I'm only 41. I'm young in some ways. My body's old from being in the Marine Corps for 13 years, but emotionally and physically, like, I'm young. My earliest memory of quote unquote trauma, big T trauma, was like 3 years old. And I wouldn't say it stopped until I was probably 35. So 32 years of a lot of trauma and a lot of self-induced trauma in reaction to the trauma because I was lacking perspective. And one of the things that I remind myself often is that perspective is the difference between my prison and my power. And I don't like to live in cliches, but I have this belief that if all of us just took into our hearts what those fortune cookies read and executed it every day, we'd be in a lot better places, because healing is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And I don't think that it's supposed to be easy, because it's the process of us becoming the best version of ourselves. And so for me, I grew up in a pretty tumultuous home. Both my parents struggled with addiction. I was a victim of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, but I also have love and gratitude for my parents for doing the best that they could have done, because my mother was the youngest of 12 and abused in every bucket by all of her siblings. My father had 5 dads by the time he was 10 who beat him, and grew up in a different era than me. And like, when I look back now in this perspective, I'm pretty lucky with what I experienced. And so my childhood was pretty up and down, and I basically became an adult at 13 when I moved out, because I tried to emancipate myself, and I navigated the system with social services and having to support myself, and being homeless as a kid and living in cars and people's couches, and then stack bullying on top of it because I was drastically overweight as a kid, and I was the new kid in town who had parents who were criminals and drug addicts labels. And so my front teeth were knocked out 3 times by the time I was 16. My nose was broken twice. I would avoid school and I would just hide in places anywhere that I could. And so that was a majority of my childhood, which also had moments of positive moments. My parents would try, but it never rewrote any of that. And the formidable years, like the 13 to 18, was when I struggled for the first time with suicide and ended up in a psychiatric ward. And I never turned to substances. I never turned to drugs or alcohol in my early years. I turned to physical harming and bulimia
Mm.
as a form of control. And so that was a majority of my childhood. And so I thought the only thing I could do was to run away. And so at 17, I forged my parents' signature and I joined the Marine Corps. And God has a funny sense of humor because I did it because it was like the hardest thing that I could do. And it was to prove to everybody else, but really it was to prove to myself that I could make it. And so I left right when I finished high school, which I love my teachers and they still listen to my podcast, which is blows my mind. But I didn't pass high school. They passed me because I missed
Mm.
140 days my senior year because I was working and working and working. And so there was no other option. So I ended up going on active duty in the Marine Corps for 13 years from 2002 to 2014, so 12 years. And during that time, I realized that the Marine Corps became my new addiction because I was told what to do every day. I had structure. I got to be the best Marine, and I did. I escalated through the ranks really fast and really unhealthily, and then ended up in Somalia in 2004, 2005, and almost lost my leg. So then I went through an entire bout of being in a wheelchair for 12 months, told I'd never walk again, becoming an opiate addict, gaining 100 pounds, having my eating disorder spiral out of control while I was an active duty
Mm.
Marine, and got to the end of that. And they're like, we're going to have to kick you out. And I was more scared of having nowhere to go than I was of figuring it out. And so the guy who they said would never walk again learned how to walk again, lost the weight, went back on active duty for 8 more years, 9 more years. And then 2008, my father passed away from metastatic brain and lung cancer. And we got to do some healing, but there was a lot of trauma there as I pulled him off life support. And I ended up accruing most of the debt and the damages from his lifestyle, and then adopted my little brother, and then ended up back in the Marine Corps and then in Afghanistan 6 months later. And then that deployment was the one that really rocked me, but also shaped me and shifted me. I had 7 traumatic brain injuries in 2 to 3 years. And then after my father's passing, after losing a couple Marines, my perspective shifted and I realized that I wasn't like my parents on paper, but I was in every other way. I was addicted to every distraction imaginable, and I was self-harming in a new way. I was overworking out. I was over obsessing about things, and I had no idea who I was or what I was doing. And when I was in Afghanistan, it all started to shift, and I realized that I was just slowly killing myself. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to do it, but I just started thinking about my life a little bit differently. And when I came back from Afghanistan, I started teaching myself how to cook so I could heal myself and get a control of my eating disorder. And it ended up turning into a business. And so then the Marine Corps was like, hey, we're going to medically separate you. And I had no backup plan. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't getting retirement after 12-ish years. And I accidentally became an entrepreneur. And I was like, look, I've made it. I've overcome all of this. And then in that journey, I was like, I'm healed. And everyone's like, how? I'm like, I read a book. And so then entrepreneurship became my new addiction. And I was
Yeah.
massively successful out of the gate and built an entire empire with millions of followers and lots of money, except I didn't sleep. I was massively depressed. I had anger outbursts. I had narcissistic tendencies. I had not dealt with any of my trauma until it all came crashing down when my son was born. And I ended up in the jungle and walked away from everything and disappeared and really started a healing journey, which took 8 years because I had to do it my way and the hard way. And I went through everything. I started with cognitive behavioral therapy, ended up in traditional psychology, psychiatry, hospitalizations. Then that transitioned to EMDR, and then I did MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And then I ended up down the very dangerous route of plant medicine. And in most of that process, over 4 or 5 years, I realized that my addiction was running from myself.
Yeah.
And the way that I summarize this for people is I was spending every moment avoiding the one relationship I was guaranteed to spend the rest of my life with. And eventually I ran out of hiding places.
Yeah.
And every place that I could hide got taken away. And it was
Yeah.
gone and it was gone and it was gone and it was gone. And then it was like an instantaneous slingshot of work and integration hit me in one day because all the things I'd been running towards for 10 years were great and they were awesome, except healing is not understanding, healing is implementing.
Mm.
And I ran out of places and I started implementing. And then that's when things really started to turn and shift. And so, just at a high level, that's a short version of some of my story.
There's a lot there. That's 4 or 5 lifetimes that you
Yeah.
just described in what you just said. Maybe more than that, maybe 10 lifetimes in what
Yeah.
you
It's
just
probably why I shaved my head because there's probably a head full of gray hair that I can't see.
said.
I keep it off.
That's all right. That just means you're wise, right?
No, gray hair in the head is stress. Gray hair in the beard is wisdom. And I have this
I see.
patch right here.
I
I have
see.
this
There's your
one gray
wisdom
patch.
patch
It's
coming
like my
out.
wisdom patch.
It's starting there. Yeah, your wisdom patch. So, yeah, there's a few things that you said in that I really think I relate to them because I think they are just the fundamentals or core tenets of what it means to be a survivor living in what I refer to as unhealthy survivorship. And I think one of the biggest things that you're talking about there was the notion of running and escape. And I think so often people think about running and escape as being addiction, drugs, or alcohol. That's what they think about. But my experience is very different. Although you meet people and you have experiences, and I've been going through this the last few months or reflect on your life, and I've come to realize that it's only God's grace in my life that saved me from being a drug addict or an alcoholic. And I absolutely know that without a doubt. And I've had some God's been reminding me of that lately quite a lot. And I'm grateful for that. There are other ways that I escaped my life, and that's what I was doing for so many years, right? This notion of when you think you're doing great at it, exactly what you talked about when you become an entrepreneur and you've got million plus followers, how many ever you have, whatever you had or have or had or whatever. I equate that to my professional career where I'm like this superstar and sought after internally and sought after by my clients and getting paid and all it's just being showered on you about how great you are, how great you are. And you pour yourself into those things and it's this self-perpetuating escape because you're in it, it feels good, and you're just diving wholeheartedly into it. But it's not until you're on the other side, like you and I are now, that you go, oh, that's what that was. And that's what I call it. That's one of the things that I describe when I talk about mine was being a busyholic in chronic chaos. And that's what I was for 20 plus years. That's how I lived my life. And just, and to your point, and not only was I not building a relationship with me and understanding who I am, but I was literally throwing everybody out of my life. Like everybody, all my family and friends out. And then by God's grace, again, luckily for me, I'm truly grateful that one day I woke up and I was in a different place. I was like, oh, this is not the way it's supposed to be. But so that I find that interesting. And I'm glad that you mentioned that you've not struggled with drugs or alcohol, really, maybe when you were going
I
through
did
things you
just to
have.
clean it up that the one that carried through is, and it wasn't intentional, but when I almost lost my legs, they put me on a PCA pump, patient controlled anesthetic, and I had it for
Yeah,
12 months.
yeah,
So
yeah.
then when they took me off of it, they're like, hey, here's these hydrocodones, and one turned into two, and two turned into eight, and eight turned into 91 a day.
Oh my goodness.
And then the hardest part for me, and I love how did you describe it? The survivorship, the
The
escaping,
unhealthy survivorship. That's what I call
unhealthy survivorship. The
it.
hardest thing for me is I did the same patterns that you did. I would isolate, I would cut people out and I had this belief as an addict that the easiest place to hide was in plain sight. So I'm a New York Times best-selling cookbook author and I'm on book tour and I'm purging before my keynote. And I'm like, no one's going to know. I have a six pack. I'm in good shape. I'm teaching health. And so all these hiding places were like directly in front of everybody. And what it was for me was like, somebody call me out on this.
Yeah,
Somebody check me. And
yeah,
even the hardest part is, to your point, like an addiction for me at whatever level is a distraction from being with our own feelings. That's all it is.
100%. 100%. That's what it is.
And unfortunately, I chose the addiction that society celebrates, which is hustle culture of entrepreneurship. So the more money I made, the more time I worked, the more clients I had, the more idolatry I created in my life,
Yeah.
the more the world was like, you're crushing. And then I pull up this photo on my phone now and I show people this, people that knew me 7 years ago. And I was like, do you remember this? They're like, That's not you. And I was like, oh, you mean when I was 270 pounds, but I was making money? And so you told me I was crushing? Like I had black eyes. Like my eyes had no color to them
Yeah.
whatsoever. And it
Yeah.
was like this celebrated perpetual cycle. And so that resonates with me deeply. And one of the things, and I just feel called to say this because I'm like a living fortune cookie. I learn in fortune cookies. I have quotes written all over me. I have one that I wrote down that said, I often prayed for things that I didn't have the character or scars to maintain. And that one lands for me.
Mhm.
Another one is, I forget that when I pray to God to move mountains, I wake up with a shovel. That's another one. And
I
then
love that.
one of the ones that I said in a keynote one time when somebody was asking me about healing, and I say it all the time now, is I said, the biggest mistake I made is never realizing that the level of my healing never had to match the level of my trauma.
That is so true.
But I was more comfortable
Yes.
in the story of my trauma and
Mhm.
rewriting the same story like Groundhog Day than I was picking up a pen and writing a new story.
Yeah.
And so I would have these profound releases. And then I would mentally convince myself it wasn't gone.
Hmm.
And then I would start reacting to that and bringing these behaviors back up and bringing these behaviors back up because I'm like, no, I can't feel better. Like, I don't know how to feel better. My whole identity has been this other thing. And it was this massive, and you said it earlier, which is what resonated with me so deeply. It took me years to realize that the reason I was consistently creating chaos is because I was raised in chaos and it was the only place I was comfortable.
Yep.
And I'd never been willing to be honest with myself that I was afraid of peace and calm
Yeah.
and that I really loved the chaos. Because when there was chaos, there was always something to do. There was always a story to prove, something to run from, a place to hide. And I was telling the story today, and you'll appreciate this. I had a dear friend, a former client on my podcast, I don't know, 4 years ago, and he was a Tibetan monk. He lived in a monastery for 7 years,
Mhm.
and now he's a hypnosis coach. And he summarized this better than anyone I've ever heard. And he said, you've never lived a day in your life if you can't poop without your phone. And there is 30,000 feet of depth underneath that statement.
Absolutely.
One of the most intimate, vulnerable moments we have with ourselves. And we can't sit on a toilet
Yeah.
for 60 to 90 seconds, or some longer if you don't have a squatty potty, and be with ourselves because we're afraid of our own thoughts or our own demons. And yet we're the only ones who can eradicate them.
Yeah. Yeah. But that is, it's not only in that space, and I love that. I mean, that because you're talking about a very short period of time, 60 to 90 seconds, but you see it everywhere.
Everywhere.
And the phone, when you're so attached to it that way, it's just another form of escape. It absolutely is. Yeah. And because we're all afraid of ourselves. That
Yeah,
is,
I got to say this too, because I now coach people on this, right? And I
yeah.
facilitate events and experiences. I don't even care if we talk about them, but there's something extremely profound that I realized, right? Like if you're listening to this and you're familiar with the competency matrix, right, then you know
Mhm.
what this is, right? But there's 4 stages of competence, and the words are really big and they're really confusing. So I'm going to summarize them. It's basically unaware, aware,
Mhm. Mhm.
learning, and
Mhm.
mastery. And I
Yeah.
think unaware is like unconsciously incompetent, and I
Yeah.
always say them in
Yeah.
the wrong
Yeah.
order.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I like your version.
the George Marine version, only 3 colors of crayons in my box because I was a Marine, black, white, and pink. It's unaware, aware, learning, and mastery.
Yeah.
What took me years to realize is that the biggest breakthrough in healing doesn't come in the learning or mastery or the application. It comes when we become aware
Mhm.
of what's there. Because once
Yes.
you see, you can't unsee.
Yes.
And what I realized, to your point of what you said, is that the one thing I've always craved, and I think everybody who's ever experienced any level of pain or trauma craves, is connection. So our default coping mechanism is isolation. And so, whatever it's distraction, it's dopamine hits, it's doom scrolling on Instagram, it's what you name it, we find every way to avoid because
Mhm.
we really want to be connected, but we don't know how.
Yeah.
And
Starting with ourselves.
starting with ourselves. And so we isolate. And then here's where I started doing the work. I was like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting with
Mhm.
psychologists because I had to survive my whole life. And so I'd hear them and I'm like, how can you talk to me about this? I know you're unhappy. You're a chain smoking prick. I saw the text your wife sent. She was not happy with you. Like, what? And I would like Matt Damon people. And so I got really fed up and I read the DSM cover to cover. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm just going to give myself a masterclass in trauma and psychology. And then I dove into Carl Jung and then I dove into all these modalities and I became a breathwork teacher and a trauma healer and blah, blah, blah. And then I realized that every modality I'd ever done and studied all had one thing in common. The whole point of them was to get to a place where I could share my experience in
Mhm.
witness of another person and be able to talk about it without it overwhelming and overrunning my emotions. That was number one.
Yeah.
And then all of them did the same exact thing for number two, which is what is a new habit, behavior, or awareness that I should practice every single day to let go of this? And so then this is what I did. I crap you not. I was like, what if I just skipped the first part and I pick a behavior and then I tell somebody this is what I'm doing and why I'm doing it? And that's when my life started to change because what I
Yeah.
also realized is one of the ways I isolated was by being addicted to telling the story and giving it power over me again.
Ah. So
Because
you're
every
essentially
time
trauma
I
bonding back with your own story.
100%. And so
Yeah.
I would grab the anchor and I would bring it back up to the
Yep.
present.
Come on, let's do it again.
And then everyone's, George, oh my God, I feel for you and blank. And I would placate people
Uh,
to get them to feel bad for me because it was another way I could avoid doing the action.
yeah.
And so then I realized, and I was like, what if I just like don't even care about what the feeling is? Like, what would I do if I got to the other side of this trauma therapy? What's the cognitive behavioral therapy they would tell me to do? And I'm like, okay, cool. We know I can't do it on my own. So I need to tell somebody, like, why are you doing this? I'm like, because I want to write a new story. I don't want that one anymore. You're not allowed to ask me. And then what was profound for me is and I got to give him full credit, John Whiteland. I went to a John Whiteland event, 100 men in Mount Shasta, and it's men doing this work, consciousness work, healing work, deep, masculine, healing our inner feminine, all these things. And he called me out. And I've been called out before, but not in a group of men. I was called
Mm,
out in personal development courses because I always had a story, right? Blah, blah, blah.
yeah. Yeah.
He called me out. And this was a 5-day event, 14 hours a day. And it was like day one. And he
Mm,
stood me up and he's like, all right, buddy, here's the rule. George is no longer allowed to tell you anything that happened prior to today. And if he does, tell me, and he is removed from the course. And that was the first time I was ever forced into silence because I realized that I didn't know how to tell another story except the one that I was addicted to telling. And so it was really profound and powerful because people would joke with me and they'd catch me. I'm like, oh. And then I'd have to realize I had nothing to say. I didn't have a goal. I didn't have a focus. I didn't have a thought. I didn't know how to ask you about your day. I was inundated and trauma bonded with my own story. And then by day three, something powerful started happening because the one thing I always craved with people was connection.
mm,
But how can I connect with you if I'm the only one talking the entire time? And what I was doing is I was using my story to keep pushing people away.
yeah.
And I would call it authenticity. And I'm like, if Beth knows everything that happened to me, take it or leave it, girl. Do you want all this? And I had a few people, God bless them, and thank you, God, for setting them, that like saw through it and stuck around till I was empty. And they're like, yeah, can we talk about life now or something positive? And the reason I say this is because what I also realized is my biggest breakthroughs came, and I say this when I talk about healing, is the biggest enemy is our brain between our ears. But the moment you speak something into existence out loud, it neutralizes the story or it
Mm,
neutralizes the charge.
mm,
And so when I wasn't allowed to speak, and then I got to really sit with there and hold my thoughts and be with my thoughts. Then when I started talking, and John did this, he said, tell me about the thing that you're afraid of. And he would ask me to share the thing, but then I'd be witnessed in it. And all of a sudden it would dissipate and go away. Because when I take it out of my mouth and I speak it into existence, I realized how silly a lot of the stories were. And this is why, and just book recommendation, I love the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, because I'm going to take the lens of trauma for me personally and tie it into God. The way that I understand this and that I internalize this for myself is the reason the quote, the devil is in the details, exists is because the details happen in your brain. And that's
yeah.
where the devil lives with distraction and God
Yeah.
lives in your heart.
Yeah.
And I realized that every moment or every time I had a thought that I was bad, that I was wrong, that I did this, that I experienced this, and I kept it in my head, I would ruminate and spiral all day. The moment I took pen to paper or opened my phone and recorded it or said it in an audio or told it to somebody, immediately the charge went away because there was no
Mm.
rumination around the details.
Yeah.
And it started to release this over and over. And so my path to healing became radical honesty,
Yeah.
not with the story,
Yeah.
with what the feeling was, and then what I was committed to.
Yeah.
And it became this muscle that I was like, wow, I have 30 years of working out this muscle. No wonder why the other one's so weak. Right. And I was like, there's only one way to shift it is I have to flex this muscle. And then
Mm.
that's actually where people started seeing my content shift because I'd turn on the camera, I'm like, how are you feeling? I'm like, crappy, but I'm stoked to be here. Right.
Yeah.
I just started labeling things without the story.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
became
The
this
feelings for
really
what they actually are.
empowering process where I'm like, also, every one of us has feelings and it's okay to feel them and express and label what it is because labeling them is what gives you power over them
Yeah.
without all the nuance underneath them, but then also showing up regardless of how I feel.
Yeah.
And so that kind of became my journey out of most of this.
That's hard for us though, right? Because part of what we're dealing with as survivors is that we don't have the concept of feeling, right?
We don't.
We don't know what our feelings are. So I was the same way. I couldn't label my feelings. In fact, my trauma started when I was 5. And I know that day I went inside of myself that day. And that was where my journey with being emotionless began. And I just lived in a state of being completely emotionless for 45 years as more stuff piled on top of me. And I did awful things to myself and all the stuff we've been talking about a little bit. But I think that was one of the most difficult things that I was challenged by was being able to recognize first and then verbalize this is the emotion I'm feeling. And I have to say, I mean, I'm 5 years into the really intentional and focused part of my healing journey, and it's still not easy all the time to be able to do that, which is exactly what you're describing. So part of our journey to heal is learning to be able to identify the emotions that we've been running from through all the awful things that we've been doing in our life as we've been running, and then being able to verbalize those. And in many cases, just sit with them, right? To sit in the pain. Sometimes we just, without the phone, right? Just you and your pain, whatever it is, you and whatever emotion you're having, just sit with it in order to be able to really experience it and then be able to process it.
I thought I have to share a story about this, and I'm blessed. One of my dear friends and brothers, Stefanos Stefandos, he's an incredible trauma coach and he's a brother of mine, but he actually is the was the key that unlocked the start of my healing journey because I was in a really tough time, business wise, relationship wise, and I was having suicidal ideations again. And it was really bad. And I called him. It was like 11 p.m. where I was. It was like 1 a.m. where he was in Texas. It was so bad that I was in Mammoth, California. It was 5 degrees Fahrenheit out and snowing. And I was walking around outside on the phone, barefoot in shorts and a t-shirt for 45 minutes on the phone with him. And I didn't feel cold. That's how amped up, and actually I was dry heaving, I was puking, I was so upset. And I was screaming to him, like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I'll never forget this. And it's the reason we're friends. He let me vent for 45 minutes. And I ended with, what do I do? And he said, and he used a very unhealthy term, but I won't repeat it, but sit with it longer. See you next Tuesday, and hung up on me. And he's Australian, so he can say that word because they get away with it. And every time I called him back, he wouldn't pick up the phone. And I had nowhere to go. And it was the first time I'd ever been told to sit with it. And I just released, and I mean released primal screams, roars, like screaming, crying, yelling out to God. And the craziest thing happened after 2 minutes, I was calm again. And we didn't talk for a couple of weeks, but everything started to shift after that because not only had I never been able to label my feelings, I had never been taught how to express them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
I
it
think
was
that's the next step, right?
time. Yeah.
Like now, how do you get it out? What's there?
Just
How do you deal with it? Yeah.
expressing them.
Yeah.
And we went on a hike about a year ago. And this happened 7 years ago. And we talked, we went on a 23-mile hike. We went for a walk and came back 23 miles later. And he's like, hey man, there's something I really want to tell you. And we talked about that day 7 years ago. And that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do because I had to make peace with the fact that you might die. But I had to say what I said. And it really hit me at a deep level because love is not gentle, love is honest. And he
Yeah.
loved me enough to be honest with me. And it shifted everything for me. I ended up a couple years later at a retreat, and I was there for healing and breath work and a lot of things. And one of the facilitators wouldn't let me participate. And I'm like, no, you have no purpose for your life. And I was like, well, how the heck am I supposed to find that? And you've never been quiet enough to hear God's whispers. And it was these like moments and moments and moments where, to your point, the first step was always being able to sit with it long enough
Mm.
to be able to identify, even if I didn't know what it was. And sometimes it was just numb. I'm numb. And I would just sit with it. And I'm numb. But until I could label it anything, you can call it tomato for all I care, as long as you
Yeah.
know where it is in your body.
Yeah.
Until you can label something or you have an awareness of it, you can't release it because you don't know where it is or what it is. And then came the second part, which to your point was releasing it.
Mm.
And that's where that quote of the level of healing, your level of healing never has to match your level of trauma came from, is because what I had realized is as an adult, I was conditioned to, how's your morning? Great. How's your day? Awesome. And then all this like horrible conditioning. And then my son was born. And my son's almost 9, but my son just lived in expressing his emotions every day. If he was 6 months old and hungry, he'd cry. And I could tell the difference between a hungry cry and a dirty diaper cry and a tired cry. And then he'd cry for 30 seconds and he'd be done. And they'd be like, and then he's 2 and he'd be upset at me and mad at me. And then he'd storm off and come back like, Daddy, I love you. And I was like, holy moly. And then I realized that every time I felt something, I wouldn't label it, but I would also never express it. And I would just stuff it down and stuff it down and stuff it down and stuff it down.
Yes.
And then Stephanos took me through an exercise and he called me and I was like, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to go over to your bed. I want you to find a song that like really lights you up. And I want you to destroy your pillow. I'm like, what do you mean? I want you to pretend you're back in war, you're back in combat, you're like XYZ. And kill it all day and see how long you can go. And I was like, I'll do this all day. Yeah. Lasted about 30 seconds before I was on my knees crying my eyes out.
Yeah.
And he's like, here you go, young Padawan. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's just hiding sadness, and you just need to allow yourself to feel. And it was just these mini moments of I'd be in breath work and then I'd feel an emotion coming up and I'm there to release it. And I'm like, nope, gotta stop breathing. Gotta stop breathing instead of letting it out. And now fast forward, you see me go on a hike here in Montana. You'll hear me scream at the top of a mountain. I'm like, like primal scream. I do it in the middle of keynotes, do it on podcasts. If I feel like crying, cry.
Yeah.
But then I go to the point and I have a podcast, which I love, and I get to interview doctors and brain scientists and all these different people. And they're like, you know what's so crazy, George, is scientifically, your body can actually only feel an emotion, the experience of it for 90 seconds. Everything past that point is residue in the story that you're ruminating on. And I was like, what?
Interesting. I've never heard that before.
1,000%. And then I was like, you got to be kidding me. And he's like, no. And then I like really started to pay attention. And
I'm just doing that now. I mean, I think what you said is so true because you think about the power of an emotion when you're having it, and then it's your mind, the devil and the details, that's perpetuating that, right?
yes,
When the expression of the emotion in those 90 seconds is coming from the heart. Even the
1,000%.
ones that are the fear-based and the lower level emotions are still coming from the pain that we're carrying. So what have we just said here? So I think what we've just said to everybody who's listening to this, experience your emotion for 90 seconds and be done with it. Be grateful for it. Know it is what it is, but don't hold on to it. If you're just ruminating on it and just your mind is, maybe you're in a way trauma bonding with the emotion still and everything that's attached to it.
1,000%. And what I had to recognize, because I can't speak for anybody listening to this, but I would submit is that when we bond to that moment or that experience without releasing it, we're robbing ourselves of everything that we claim that we want or that we claim.
100% I agree with that. Absolutely.
And what we have to be really honest with is, and I say this to entrepreneurs when I coach them, Because they'll come to me and they're like, George, I have a vision. I know exactly how I'm going to get there. I'm like, then it's not a vision. What do you mean? I'm like, if you can tell me how you're going to get there, you are building something you've already built before. And they're like, what
Yeah.
do you mean? And I'm like,
Right.
new vision, new level, unknown, and
Yeah.
you have to walk in that. All too often, we are so comfortable or bonding with that feeling or that emotion that we have because it's unknown on the other side of what it's like to be different or act different. So
Yeah.
you also get to be aware that it should feel unknown.
Yeah.
It should feel different. And if you're a person of faith, well, great, because God tells you that He's going to put a lamppost at your feet and He's going to guide your steps.
Yes. So when you said that, what I was thinking about is what you're also talking about is the ego, us as people who need to control, escape, still trying to control. Right? And
Yep.
it's only in that accepting the fact that we don't know where we're going in anything we're doing, accepting the unknown, being excited for the unknown, not having fear of the unknown, and knowing that's God, that's
Yep.
spirit, that's the universe active in our lives, taking us to where we need to be. I think that is so true about finding your purpose as well. And when people say, I have a vision, I know where I'm going, that's the ego. That's the control that we try to have. And even in trauma and trying to heal, that still is very active in us. And maybe in some ways, a form of that escape still
A
biting us,
thousand percent.
right?
And it's the most powerful practice I do every day is my stillness practice.
Hmm.
The first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, I lay
Hmm.
there still or I go outside and I just sit. And if I'm sad, if I'm happy, if I'm depressed, if I'm whatever,
Yeah.
and you're just supposed to have, it's by the way, it's human being, not human doing.
Yeah.
Being means existing, it means feeling, it means expressing. And just to be very clear about this, God saved my life and all glory to Jesus all day because every one of these moments, like I'm just speaking from things that I experienced and learned, and I'll just shorten it because I've read 1,000 business books and I've been coaching people for years and I don't read any of them anymore. I just read my Bible because it's all in there. I was like, oh, there's where that is. Oh, there's that moment. Oh, funny. That's what it talks about in there. Okay, cool. And even to your point about purpose, the same thing that I talked about earlier with the definition of healing. There's no finish line with healing, and
Yeah.
purpose is not a end state, it's a current state.
Yeah.
Because the only purpose that you have is what you're seeding in your garden right now. Like my purpose right now is to be the best dad I can be, but that's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
It's going to shift, it's going to change. And purpose is like an active pursuit of what is growing me, what is bringing me joy, what is helping. And I think one of the ways that I internalize this for myself is when I look at the field of life, we all have a garden. And in that garden, we have the ability to plant seeds, to harvest the fruit of those seeds, but weeds also grow.
Yeah.
And I think what I've understood and learned in the years is that when I thought healing was a finish line, I was like, oh, I took the weeds out of my garden. I put some plastic down. They don't ever grow again. There's weed killer. No, if you've ever had a garden, it doesn't matter what you do, weeds are coming in.
Coming. They are coming.
And that's the world that we live in.
Yeah.
Because also, and I'd submit, and I'll get canceled for this all day, that we don't live in a society that benefits or profits on our healing.
Yeah.
It profits on our pain
Yeah.
and it profits off the ability to control
Yes.
us in those moments,
Yeah. 100%.
which means the world that we live in is constantly throwing weeds into our garden. And what ends up happening is that we get so fixated on the weeds that we forget to start planting the seeds and keep planting the seeds. And then we're hungry and there's nothing to pick.
Yeah.
And so it took me a long time to realize that it's an active pursuit in both buckets.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a pursuit in planting seeds of what's my purpose? Who do I want to be? Like, what can I do today to fill my bucket, to express my emotions? Then it's oh, I got to pluck these weeds out because I have new trauma today because that person said that, client said that, I saw that post here. And then there's oh, I need to pick the fruits of these seeds so I can eat and eat. And it's all three of them
Yeah.
happening simultaneously. And it's
Yes.
the pursuit of each and every one of them where I think purpose comes from.
I agree with you. Yeah. I think
So,
it's watering. I think the only thing I would add to it is watering the seeds,
yeah,
which for me is about that continual learning of what the seeds are meant to be and how I'm supposed to get the seeds out there. And to me, that's seeking. It's seeking
yeah.
from God to know what I'm meant to do with the seeds that I'm planting. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. It's so great.
Yeah, and thank you for adding the watering. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the way that I would shortcut or summarize this for everybody is the only time I've ever realized what I've realized is the only time I'm ever in pain is when I'm idle. And not idle
Mm.
in the lens of I'm not doing something, I'm not intentionally doing something. So we can all sit still and numb out, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
different to sit still and be present and invite
Yes.
thought into those moments, right?
Yeah.
But I also realize, and I've read the Bible a ton, and happiness isn't mentioned once. And there's one Sabbath day. It's Saturday for everybody, by the way, not Sunday's the start of the week. That's why church is on Sundays. But Saturdays are the rest day to replenish and to be. But it's to be, it's to chop wood and carry water. It's to be of service. It even talks about in the Bible, it's not the ones that plant the garden, it's the ones that water the garden and harvest the garden that reap the rewards and the results. And like the life that we have right now, we're in the results of our previous 90 days of actions,
Yes.
and it's just an input game, and it's not an intensity game. I say this to my clients all the time, that people overvalue intensity and they undervalue consistency.
Yeah.
And to your point of watering, sometimes watering on a healing journey is, did I shower today? Amazing. Did I brush my teeth today?
Yeah.
Amazing. Did I
Yeah.
go for a 5 minute walk? Amazing. Hey, I've been avoiding 60 text messages on my phone today. Can I respond to one of them?
Yeah.
And we tend to overcomplicate and over sensationalize the journey. But what we're really doing is we just keep moving the starting line.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah.
And the moment that you just take one intentional bite,
One
one
intentional
intentional
bite.
step, and then you
Even,
tiny and you
yeah.
celebrate that bite,
Yes.
that's what healing is.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It is this active pursuit of, okay, got it. Like, I know I'm exhausted. I know the kids woke me up all night. I know this happened in business. I have this story ruminating. But if I don't water at least one seed, there's going to be no food to eat.
Yeah.
And so you just water that seed and you water that seed. And we have to fall in love with that process.
Yeah. So I agree 100%. And your point about the last 90 days, if you want to know where you are today, I would submit to you take a look at what your last 90 days have been like. What have you been doing the last 90 days? And I'll tell you why you are where you are today, right? And nurturing that process, that slow build, right? So just taking those small actions in the beginning. What I found is that it picks up speed because you start to recognize what's happening, you see your own progress. For me, I talk about it in terms of building hope, right? Building the knowledge and the awareness, the belief inside of me that I can heal and continue to heal for my entire life. And I really loved what you said a little bit earlier about the daily traumas that we experience, right? And we've already said this, healing is not a journey with a destination. You talked about it, 8 years of the really hard work. I would say I probably had 3, maybe 4 years of really hard work, but every day my healing journey is continuing. I mean, before we started recording, I shared with you that I closed on a home yesterday, which is a healing milestone for me in terms of home ownership, and some things that I've been through, which was part of my being a busyholic and chaos was attached to all of that. And I was like, threw my hands up and I was like, I'm done. I don't ever want to do this anymore. But God has a way of working in my life. And I came around to a very different place where I had this milestone yesterday. And that is something that I would take outside of the intentional and focused part of my healing, where I was really doing the hard work. And let's face it, those 8 years you talk about, the years that I'm thinking about, they suck. It's hard. It is, right? Because of all that stuff that we're shedding. But what I find now is that what I've built is muscle memory on how to respond in a healthy way to those daily traumas, those
Mhm.
things, the little t stuff. So whatever interaction you had with somebody that you felt a emotion that was not a love-based emotion in your body, when somebody you had an interaction with somebody, right? That's that little t stuff. And that's what we're talking about in terms of the journey goes on forever, right? And that's what we're learning to do in the healing process. And along with it is watering those seeds of hope that we plant that then become, I think, really lead us to what our purpose is, right? Which is what the whole evolution of understanding who you are at a very deep level, that deep self-discovery work that we have to do to be able to heal, getting to know you. Who are you really? Who am I really? Knowing myself, right? That really is what then leads to really being able to understand what your purpose is on a
Yeah.
given day.
Yeah, I want to say something to this because you mentioned this earlier. It doesn't take 8 years unless you fight.
That I agree with so much. Absolutely. And I will say this to you because and maybe that is the difference between the time periods that you and I are talking about. If somebody's listening, there's like you say 2 or 3 years, and George is saying 8 years. And I think people would naturally go, maybe it goes back to the big T stuff that the two of you have experienced. And we've already said that. It's not about that, it's about the emotions and the heart. So I do think you are right about that because the reason that it took me 45 years to start my journey, I think it's two things. I think it was not being ready to heal, right? I wasn't in that place where I was ready to heal. I also think for me, and probably for you as well, those things that we see as our experiences, and we may call them our failures and the bad things we did and I was wrong, I think they are lessons in relatability so that we can talk to people who we'll share our stories with to help them, right? And so we have to learn those things ourselves, right? But really not being at that place where I was ready to heal. But also for me, it was a lack of awareness and I needed a light bulb to go
Mhm.
on for me. But once that bulb went on, so I think all those things were my resistance for one
Mhm.
reason or another. I did 20 plus years of therapy before I ever got to a trauma therapist who could actually help me. And I didn't know why it wasn't working. And I've reflected on it a lot now about what was happening. And there are all kind of reasons for why it wasn't hurting. But ultimately, I think it's that resistance. That's really what it was.
Yeah.
When I really started making that quicker progress, that fast progress, because I had a complete awareness, like all the light bulbs went on for me. Oh, and I was like, no more. And I was reading about other people who had healed, they had moved on past their suffering. And I was like, they can do it, I can do it. And once I realized that, I was like, done. I'm not living my life. Ultimately, the decision I made was I am not living my life this way anymore because of what other people did to me. I'm just
Mhm.
not. I'm not allowing anyone to control me like that. And
Mhm.
that is when I began to really move. And so I think those are the things that really come into how long it takes and being very careful about what we've talked about. What are we talking about? How long it takes.
I think, and I wanted to call that out because I think if I had to summarize that, it was number one, and you nailed this with what you just said. I was doing the work without a desire to change.
Hmm.
I was doing the work with a desire to be, and that's where it started to shift. And this is where looking in the mirror, you spend 60 seconds looking at yourself in the eyes in the mirror, and I'll tell you everything you need to know about yourself. Because if you can't look in that mirror with love and with
Yeah.
acceptance and with grace, then you might not be there. And that's where catalytic moments come in, and they happen in small sizes, big sizes.
Yeah.
And this is why, and you mentioned this earlier, I just wasn't willing for my quote unquote ego to die. And I want to define ego for everybody. The way that I would define ego in this situation is it's my way. I know I get to, it's got to be this way because it's all a semblance of control. It wasn't openness. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't any of that. And it wasn't even until I dove into my Bible, and I'll never forget this line, and we all know it. It's pick up your cross and follow me every day. Pick up your
Mhm.
cross, and crucify yesterday. Like yesterday is gone. It's not
Mhm.
here. And I
Yeah.
relate so much to the Bible because if God was calling me out of Egypt, it would have taken me 40 years too, because I wouldn't have listened. Like that whole journey was supposed to take a year. It took 40 because of ego and identity and all of these things. And really,
Resistance.
it was resistance and it was a
Yeah.
unwillingness to surrender.
A
And
great example.
when
Yeah.
you were speaking earlier, the amount of weight and control we give to things that are only temporary blows my mind.
Yeah.
And even you buying a home
Yeah.
is temporary.
It's temporary.
Even me moving out is temporary. Me having a business is temporary.
Yeah.
It is this false idolatry of building idols on earth and
Yeah.
bypassing what we have forever with treasures in heaven. And even me as a parent, right? Like my days with him are different now with a divorce than they were before. But I was like, oh, it's always going to be this way. It's when we attach to any of those moments that we either attach to, this is how it was behind me, or this is the only way it's going to be in front of
Yeah.
me, that we are in a lose game.
I agree.
And to your point, the only difference that happens is I say this all the time that awareness is our finish line because awareness
Mhm.
gives us the ability to respond.
Yeah.
And in the game of life, the only thing that happens is our response times get shorter and shorter
Mm.
with less pain or collateral damage, and then
Mm.
eventually become proactive in seeing it coming before it does, but also knowing that you might not catch them all and you're going to always adjust.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is the gym to build the capacity, the IQ, and the EQ to be able to spot those things, to allow yourself to stay in the present when those things happen so that you can choose how to respond.
Yeah.
And even when I went through 12-step programs, I was like literally the one line I fought the whole time is submit to something greater than yourself. I'm like, there isn't anything greater than me. There isn't. And it was a pastor on a plane out of Bali who I had to help with his luggage because he was like 85 and nobody would help him at 2 a.m. Then he turns out to be sitting in the seat next to me. Then he speaks into me for 5 hours by just listening to me. And then he gives me his business card, and I have no intention of ever following up with him. And then I have it in my backpack. My backpack gets wet. It floods. It's unreadable. And I'm like, never going to talk to this guy. He's 85, doesn't have technology. The next day shows up on my calendar, gets on a 15-minute call, and me turns into 3 hours. And all he says to me is, I think you believe in God, but the wrong one. And you aren't him, my friend. And that was actually the catalytic moment that led me down me being saved in faith
Yeah.
because I cried to him for 3 hours because I felt called out and seen because I never wanted that. It was just a trauma wound and a response and a reaction over and over. I'm like, look, I can't trust anybody.
Mm.
No one's safe. This happened. No way.
Mm.
I'll never forget this, Beth. The last question I asked him, I said, I'm in. What Bible do I start with? And I'll never forget, he looked me dead in the eye and he said, brother, that's between you and God. And I was like, you're a freaking evangelical pastor. Like, you're not going to tell me? He said, no. I get in my car. I drive home 45 minutes from the office to the house. I'm the only person who's saved in my home. And I walk in the door. My son runs up to me, give me a hug. He said, Daddy, I was at the store earlier and I got you something. And he hands me a New King James Version pocket New Testament. And I lost it. He was walking through the store.
So
Somebody was
great.
giving them out. He saw the cover.
That
It
is
was
so great.
orange and boom, and comes home and he's, Daddy, I got you something. What did you get me? And he hands me this, and I lost it. And then I was like, okay. So I think all of us, and the reason I'm saying this is because any of these things that we tend to give too much weight to or too much power to are really robbing us from the gift that this life is.
Yes.
There's no such thing as permanence. Like the one thing we all have in common is we're
So
all
true.
gonna die.
That's so true. One of the things that I do a lot on my journey, and part of it is me doing the work to share my journey and to illustrate to people how it works, is to track the moments of impermanence, and they may have been painful at one time, and then watch the journey and how things are connected. So I even think about if I can do that, tracking back the process to how you and I are even on this recording now and actually having this conversation, which goes, I can take it all the way back to college, right? But being able to put those together, for me, those are profound journeys that we have in our lives. That's what I call the God touches. And the universe, literally, I feel that, which I'm guessing that maybe is how you felt when your son has the Bible. Like literally, you feel the hand of God come down and touch you. And they are so profound. And I've had so many of them, and I have an awareness about it now. And I look for them. And I'm an investigator by nature, and that's what my previous profession was for a long time. So I like to go back and connect the dots. But that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Is the impermanence of those moments, but they may be connected, really, I think, moving us all forward as we're evolving and becoming who we actually are meant to be, our I am, our real I am, right? Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
that's amazing. I love stories like that. They're so great.
I got a lot of
Powerful.
them. I got a
I do
lot of them.
too. I do too. I have a whole lot of them. So they're really profound and really amazing. So yeah,
Mhm.
they are. Yeah. I could keep us going forever.
We can land the plane.
Yeah, we'll do it again for sure. We'll
Mhm.
definitely do it again. So I think one thing that I do want to circle back to and ask you just before we close is going back to the beginning when you were talking about your story and some of the pain and the suffering and how it all began. You were talking about your parents. And one of the things that I have come to understand, as I've worked on the relationship with my parents and the broader relationship in my family, including with the first person who abused me was my grandfather, who died before I actually began the intentional and focused part of my healing journey, right? So I've done a lot of that healing work at the soul level between our spirits. That's how I've had to do that work. But one of the things that's been most profound to me and helping me to get to what some people refer to as forgiveness. I talk about letting go of the emotions associated with those people and the events that were binding my heart and keeping me from knowing love, just to let it go, right? It's literally what I do. But part of that process for me was steps through my journey that first I had to accept myself as a survivor and have the acceptance of myself and grace for myself because I am a survivor. And it's a concept that I call mirroring. And once I knew that about myself, I could literally see it in everyone else who's ever intersected in my life in a painful way and was able to let go of that. And that's what I want to ask you about is where you are with that, with your parents or other people who may have hurt you in your life, that understanding and that awareness. That's the reality for the vast majority of us, is that we are a survivor. And that's why we do things to people that we do to people.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. I heard a quote last night from Philip Anthony Mitchell, one of my favorite pastors, and I think I shared it with you before. And he said, "The darkness inside of us are the lanes we create for the devil to traffic." And I think a lot of times people think healing is done externally.
Yeah.
The healing is only done on your heart. It has nothing to do with the other people.
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember going through a process at a personal development course. It was like a mini Gestalt empty chair process. And there were two chairs. I sat in one and I was facing another one, and the other one was empty. And I got to have a conversation with my mother. And then I had to switch chairs, and then I had to be my mother and have a conversation back to myself.
Hmm.
And I did this quite a few times. And then I did it with my
Hmm.
father. It was the first time I've ever experienced a perspective shift because I had to think differently. And I was like, how would my mom respond to this? And I'm like, oh, that was not my mom's intention. That was not X. That was not Y. And it started to create this healing. And then my father had passed when I had done this. And so I felt really stuck. And then I realized that what I just shared is that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for ourselves and our hearts.
Yeah.
And I felt stuck. And so what I did is I actually wrote a letter to my dad, and then I flew home and I buried it at his grave. And then I realized that was like a big act. And now it was just actually the act of writing a letter and
Hmm.
releasing it and letting it out. But it has to be from a place, to your point, of self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-love, and true forgiveness. And I
Hmm.
think now this is a muscle that I practice every day, like in conversations that I'll have on the daily, and I'll be praying before bed. And like, Lord, please forgive me for seeing them this way or having resentment in my heart or having judgment in my heart. Like, I know that's one of your children, Lord. And like, I ask, and I don't even, it has nothing to do with other people. It is 100% to your point earlier of not allowing holes in my heart. And that's where I've landed on that. And just understanding the essence of the world is like we're all having our own independent human experience, but it becomes this massive bomb that we blow up. And it's like everyone did this to me on purpose and they're out to get me and they're boom. And then I also have faced the thousands and thousands of people I've unintentionally hurt. And I have a responsibility as somebody who speaks and has touched millions and millions of lives. But I also have a responsibility to hear them when I hurt them and adjust and check. And is this a growth point? Is this what I want is forgiveness. And I was like, oh, yeah, John talks about how I won't forgive you until you forgive everybody else. And I'm like, oh, there it is again. And so it's just this constant workout or muscle of become aware, accept, release, forgive, and renew it again because it's going to happen again. It's going to
Yeah.
happen again, and it's going to happen again. And
Yeah.
now, what I found, if there's any spots in my head, in my heart, in my body that I'm avoiding, that's the darkness where I'm allowing the devil to take a foothold. And now I, as aggressively as possible, eradicate those places.
Yeah.
And some of them aren't instant. Like I was flying the other day and I was like, oh, I have 30 text messages I haven't responded to in a couple of weeks. Why have I not responded? And I'm like, doesn't really matter why, does it? Go respond. And nothing bad, but these like little pockets of like avoidance or overwhelm or
Mhm.
expectation or all of them. They're all the same thing. And we obsess
Yes.
about the big ones. And I would submit it's the little ones that cause more pain for the big ones and make them last longer. And so it's just this constant practice. And so that's how I see that.
Yes. And ultimately, this is all about relationships, right? And connectivity between people. And on that point you were just making, I tell people that for me, it's those little tea like moments, right? Of things, whether somebody does it to me or I do it to myself or to someone else. Those are the things that actually cause a lot more pain and a lot longer lasting pain that's difficult to get past. Those are the things that I'm fighting every day, right? And I'm trying to move past every single day. Those are the types of things. The big stuff, that big T stuff, no big deal, right? That doesn't stay with me, right? But it's those small things which are harder, right? To why didn't I answer those 30
Mm-hmm.
texts? Why am I not responding to that? It's that those small things. Yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah. Okay. We didn't talk about what it is that you're doing today, heart-centered work and helping heart-centered people to be out there in the world and create the ripple effect that we're trying to advance the idea of love broadly across the world. So I do want to give you a little bit here to say whatever it is that you would like to say about that and how it is that people can find you.
Yeah, I'll make it short and sweet. My mission is to empower heart-centered entrepreneurs to scale their businesses in a way that changes the world. And there's enough toxicity out there that I do it the other way. And the way that we do that is not only by loving your customers, but loving yourself first.
Hmm.
And the best businesses are the ones that are built in alignment, that they authentically mirror who we are, what we believe, and why we believe it. And we're supported in that process. And so my love every day is pouring into people and helping them turn their light up brighter in their lighthouse and extract their superpower and do more of it. And so I do that through marketing and messaging and customer journey. And let's be honest, like being Dr. Phil for them most of the time, helping listen and share and create space and relate. And if anybody's wondering, that the best place, and Beth knows this, is my podcast. We are about to pass 600 episodes and I give everything I know away for free. Everything from mindset to relationships to marketing to messaging to scaling to customer journey to everything in between. And I do 2 shows a week. One is me teaching, and one is a guest interview in any of those buckets: relationships, mindset, customer journey, business. And it's my happy place. And then that's where you'll find all my stuff. And then I love hosting experiences and retreats. And we do 2 to 3 of them a year, and we love bringing a small group of entrepreneurs to Montana to get poured into for 3 days and help them turn up the volume of their business.
Excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you and have April back because I love her. And I will say the easiest place to connect with me, if I said anything today, if you want to share, if you have any questions, if you want to yell at me, you want to correct me, whatever you want to do, like I welcome all of it with love. The best place is my Instagram. You DM me, it comes right to me, and I will help you any way that I can. And I know Beth will link it in the show notes, but it's really easy because it's George Bryant, but the it's is included. They got to tell you that because I'm like, it's not George Bryant, it's George Bryant. And it's the hardest thing to say, but that's the easiest way. And if you need a reason to go to my website, my favorite color is pink. And I'll have to tell you that story another time. But my website is the pinkest website that you will ever see. So you can also go make fun of me.
No, I think it's great. I was actually having a conversation with somebody yesterday about I really like to meet the person who decided that pink is a girl color and blue is a boy color
It was
because I
marketers.
do not, color is color. I don't get it.
It was
So,
marketers, actually.
oh,
It
of
was a
course,
marketing, it was a marketing
of course.
strategy, yeah, because pink and purple used to be the color of kings, and then it was a way to sell kids stuff.
Yeah, I would like to meet that person because as a lover of color, I would have
Uh-huh.
some things to say about that.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
Yeah, yeah. I will link in the show notes where people can find you and your podcast and all of that stuff. So
Amazing.
able to find you. You are so full of wisdom. You really are. And I know you've been through some really difficult things in your life and touched on why I believe you've been through those things. And that's so that you can have all of this wisdom inside of you and be relatable to other people to do God's work. And I am really grateful for all of the challenges. And I know you didn't share everything, but you did say a few things there that could have been life ending for you. And I'm really grateful that you are still here with us because you are alive. That's what
All glory to God and His
matters. Yes.
grace, and I'm grateful for all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has been great. We'll have to do it again at some point
Well,
in time. And I'm so glad to have had you here.
me too. And for everybody listening, if you listened, thank you for giving me the only gift I can't give back to you, which is time. And so I appreciate it. And I'll say
Love
what I say
that.
on my podcast. If you did make it this far and you handled my crazy, then whatever you heard is an invitation to go act on it, not to allow it to become shelf help. Like today's the day. So
Yeah.
pick
Today's the
one thing,
day.
just one
Yes.
thing, and do it consistently, and you'll be.
Yes. Yes. And I'm going to follow that up by saying today is the day. And the way that I always end my show is to encourage everyone. Come on, let's heal. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. And if you'd like to know more about me and my work to help other survivors to heal, please visit me on the web at empoweredsurvivors.com.